If you would please take your seats. We're going to try and go ahead and get started this morning. And I've been asked if you all wouldn't mind, please silence your cell phones. Thank you so much. Good morning. I'm Elizabeth Shouse-Caffey. I'm an associate priest here at St. Luke's. Advocacy and outreach with our neighbors is the heart of who we are as a community and how we live out our faith here. And so it is so fitting for St. Luke's to be hosting the Atlanta Housing Forum in our sanctuary this morning. I am going to give a quick invitation that if you don't currently have a church home or are seeking a faith community, we would welcome you back here on a Sunday morning. Welcome on behalf of the clergy and vestry of St. Luke's. We are so glad you're here to celebrate 30 years of collaboration and discussion around affordable housing solutions. And I'm so excited to look forward towards the next 30 years and how we carry the momentum of this work forward. And so now, without further ado, I'm going to welcome Bill Bolling.
Well, good morning, everyone. You notice in 30 years, they now have me standing on a stand down here to look taller. Last time I got a checkup, they said I was 2 inches shorter than I was telling people I was. So, welcome. So good to see so many of you. Many of you we meet quarterly and we see each other between meetings. Some of you I haven't seen in a while, so welcome back. You know, we were planning the next housing forum, and Bruce Gunner, who's over here, Bruce came up and said, "Bill, did you know we've been doing this for 30 years? I had no idea. And maybe we should celebrate 30 years because work is hard enough, you know, that where we're always climbing that hill, every once in a while we need to stop and celebrate." So that's what we're going to do today. I want to thank St. Luke's Church. How many of you were here about a year ago when we did a mayoral forum? How many people were in the room? So many of you. So in a way, we're coming back a year later, and the mayor's going to be with us in a few minutes, both to celebrate the work of the forum, but also to kind of circle back to what we have now is an extraordinary commitment by the mayor and the city for affordable housing. We're going to hear today about some of the milestones of the Housing Forum. We're also going to hear from some of the pioneers. I don't know if they want to be referenced as pioneers, sounds kind of, but folks who have been in the movement for many, many years. So let me again just ask, how many people work in advocacy? Because we do different roles. Well, everybody could say they work in advocacy, right? How many of you work in the financial sector? Not an equal number. I got your names. I know who you are. How many people are from academia? Because you've always participated. We've always had students here. Folks from academia. Excellent. How many people are in the development business? The hard frontline business. Good group. How many people are here from the public sector, from government? From different levels. I see some of you raising your hand at everything I ask, so I'm... What about housing counseling? Anybody working with clients? Very, very important. How many people run nonprofit organizations? God bless you. And how about those in transit and transportation? Another key issue that we often talk about: education, transportation, and how these things are linked. So, thank you again for being here. Seems important that we're in a church today, because this stuff is hard. So we need to kind of have a revival, share where we've been, share that we've been showing up for 30 years. And many of you in the room have literally been showing up. How many people started in those first years, 1988 or 90, over at the food bank? How many people in those early days? That was a 7:30 meeting, folks. I don't know what we were thinking. And we also were eating Krispy Kreme donuts and coffee, so we got all jacked up before the meeting. We thought we'd have Krispy Kreme today, but it was not politically correct. So we're going to begin the program. Let me ask the housing pioneers, as we call them, to come up front, please. And you can give them a hand before they say anything. Like usual, we don't know the real order or what's going to happen here, but that's the beauty of the Housing Forum, isn't it? Let me quickly introduce the panel. Their bios are in your program, so most of us know everybody in the room, so it's going to be very short. Frank Alexander, the famous Frank Alexander, professor of law, emeritus from Emory University School of Law, and co-founder, very importantly, of the Center for Community Progress. Frank has been active from the beginning, and then he went off and changed the world. So Frank, thanks for being back. The infamous Hatty Dorsen, founder and former president and CEO of Atlanta Neighborhood Development Project. Hattie. Now, Hattie's the one who said, 7:30? I'm not getting up for 7:30, so we made it just for you, 9:30 today, Hattie. Bruce Gunner, both a member of this church, was the co-founder of Progressive Redevelopment and founder of Civitas Housing Group. Bruce, and has been part of the planning group here. And M. Tomanika Youngblood, chair of the board and past president of the Historic District. I'm not even going to go on. M. Tomanika. We modeled most of what we're doing in neighborhoods out of what M. Tomanika did in the 4th Ward and Hattie did at ANDP. So let us begin. Now, a little bit different in today's forum. This is very organized, unlike usual housing forum, meaning we've got a lot of speakers, a number of videos, a lot of business that we want to get done. So where I usually kind of let things slide, we're going to stay right on the program if we can. Frank, you're up first. Your involvement with Housing Forum goes back decades. I think we were all in middle school when we started, weren't we, Frank? We appreciate the work you've been engaged in academics and policy and advocacy. Can you share your perspective on the role of the Housing Forum, how it's intersected in your work? Thank you, Frank.
Do you want me to use this?
Yeah.
I'm not used to using a microphone in the classroom. Bill and Bruce and others asked me just to share some of, not all right, even better. Bill and Bruce and others just asked me to share some reflections from those early days of the Housing Forum. And I'm honored to do so. I'm honored to be here, to be back in the sanctuary at St. Luke's, to be with all of you this morning, to be with old friends, and to meet new friends. As I was thinking back on those early years, and here my time frame really is 88 to 98, and the Housing Forum, three things occurred to me about the power of what we were doing in those days. The first is to realize that the Housing Forum was simply a gathering of individuals, of friends, and of folks who would become friends. It was simply a safe place to meet and to share our passions, our concerns, to listen to each other and to learn from each other. No other agenda in those early days. The issues we were focusing on, particularly in the time frame of 88, 89, 90, was homelessness. The fact that we had so many folks who lacked safe, decent, affordable housing. The target population of concern were those with AIDS, those who were HIV positive, and the rampant discrimination by our communities against housing those populations. Some of us were also focused on housing for individuals with chronic mental illness, with substance abuse, with disabilities. So these were passions that we began to organize, that we began to talk about, that we had together. We were also beginning to talk about, well, where can we find the funds to do this? So in this same period of time, there were individuals who were involved in an early study commission to create a state housing trust fund, which formally, when it was ultimately created, was called the State Housing Trust Fund for the Homeless, though those last two words are never used anymore. But that came out of some of these discussions in those early days. The second thing that was characteristic for me of these gatherings, and at least for the first decade or so, Bill, it was monthly housing forums, not quarterly, and at 7:30 in the morning, and I needed those Krispy Kremes and that coffee. But the second characteristic was the fact that we came as individuals. We did not come in our institutional representation. As Bill shared, we all came from different places. But what brought us together was to listen and to learn, not to advocate for our particular clients or institutionals' representation or formal roles. And that was liberating for us to be able to have these discussions and to discover where we overlapped with our passions and where we differed with our passions. The third characteristic of the Housing Forum in these early years was indeed the fact that some crazy ideas came out of the Housing Forum. The State Housing Trust Fund for the Homeless, work on a number of different initiatives for affordable housing, for homelessness, across wide spectrums. In those early days, it was primarily the city of Atlanta, and indeed with discrete areas of focus in the city of Atlanta. I don't think it's accurate to describe the Housing Forum then, or perhaps not now, as an incubator. That suggests a more formal intentionality to create an agenda collectively. One of the things that was most exciting was that every housing forum I learned, I got inspired by what others were doing, and I also saw some overlapping interest and passions. And we started doing land banks as a way of converting vacant and abandoned properties into new productive uses, affordable housing, green space, and other things. With the advent of the Great Recession and the foreclosure crisis, those of us in that space couldn't handle the demands nationwide, so we created the Center for Community Progress, which is now a national nonprofit focused on the conversion of vacant, abandoned, deteriorated properties into new, productive uses as locally determined. And in the last decade, we've done legislation in 15 states and got now 190 land banks operating across the country. It's not because I've done it, it's really because the idea came from these crazy discussions in the early Housing Forum. But for me, the most important thing about the Housing Forum was the opportunity to share our concerns and our passions, to discover those things that we had in common back then, that we have in common now, to brainstorm ideas, to sow the seeds and see where the seeds would blossom and develop. Now, there has always been an element of the Housing Forum of intentionally troubling the waters. Most of us that have come to the Housing Forum have not been content with still waters. So there's been an element of all of us, or many of us, that say we cannot accept things the way they are. Or, as Bobby Kennedy used to quote from George Bernard Shaw, some look at things as they are and ask why, while others dream of things as they never have been and ask why not. That is my sense of the Housing Forum. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Frank. And you know, one of the key messages I think Frank just delivered, very much like the food bank who started back in the late 70s, is as you create new initiatives, new models, the key to making it better is to share, right? Frank was able to share this around the country and to how many states he talked about. So that continuously learning from each other and making it better, I think, is a key to our success. Our first video is coming up, and it's from Claire Axum, I think a person that a lot of people know here. Let's roll it.
30 years ago, the Atlanta Housing Forum was just a handful of people who occasionally came together to talk about neighborhood revitalization in Atlanta. Lots of ideas, plenty of questions, but few answers about exactly what to do in Atlanta or how to do it. Look at us now. Sometimes finding a space large enough to hold all of our voices can be a challenge. Thank you, Atlanta Housing Forum, for giving us a space for the last 30 years where we could learn and debate about the choices for affordable housing in Atlanta. Thank you for the strategic partnerships that we've created, many of them born in this space. Thank you for the opportunity to exchange ideas and experiences, some good, some bad, but all of them used to feed our dreams for the communities we call home. And thank you for encouraging us when we desperately needed to recharge our batteries and start again. Most of all, thank you for nurturing our collective voices and giving us the courage to issue a call for action for a more affordable, sustainable, equitable Atlanta. The road has been tough, a myriad of twists and turns and challenges, but the journey would not have been possible without you. Thank you and congratulations.
Thank you, Claire Axum. We're going to keep moving along, and I want to invite Bruce Gunner. Bruce, you started out developing affordable housing in this very place, at St. Luke's. It's where a lot of things began in town. You convinced St. Luke's to build their first Habitat house. That experience led you to co-found PRI, which went on to develop over 4,000 units of affordable housing around the state. But you have been at the policy and advocacy table, including the Housing Forum, for almost 33 years. I recall you saying that PRI decided early on that its best form of advocacy was the housing it developed. So tell us a story about some of that housing. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, Bill. I will tell a story, and I'm going to beg your indulgence. I'm going to sit down and read a little bit because I got an hour-long story and 8 minutes to tell it. So thank you. So the story is really about the birth of Progressive Redevelopment, PRI, but really on a more profound level. It's about courage and perseverance for the common good in the face of many daunting obstacles. You heard Claire refer to that. And I describe this also as a resurrection story because 3 significant affordable housing developments that you will hear about arose from dereliction and desperation. This was in the early 1990s when Bill was running the soup kitchen in the parish hall where you just left. It looked much different back then. And the city was just coming to grips with its growing homelessness issue. What became symbolic of that situation was the Imperial Hotel down the street, an abandoned and derelict building at the prominent gateway to downtown. So there Should be there it is. Now that's the before picture. That's really before, I think 1917. Didn't look, but it was, in its heyday, it was the so-called Holiday Inn of downtown. But by then, by the 90s, it had become vacant and derelict. So it's a good tale that I can now tell in its entirety. Since the statute of limitations has passed, I can come clean, as you'll hear about in a minute. And you can also read the book if you want to. This was a book by Terry Easton. He's a professor at Kennesaw State, I believe, and it told the story of the imperial occupation. And that's the story, that's the courageous, desperate folks that I referred to, and out of this, the 3 affordable housing developments flowed, as you will hear. The first one that I want to talk about is the Welcome House, but the story does start at the Imperial. Like all good dramas, it has a colorful cast of characters. Shirley Franklin, the Reverend Craig Taylor, my predecessor at PRI, John Portman, and looming over all was Mayor Maynard Jackson. But the real heroes were the courageous people of faith, such as Ed Loring and his wife, the Reverend Murphy Davis, of the Open Door community. Many of you will remember the Open Door community. They were prophets. And the 100 or so others, most of whom were homeless, who entered and occupied the Imperial for an entire week in 1990 in what became a front news standoff. With this very church sending water and sandwiches to the occupiers, and many of the homeless folks having nowhere else better to go, it appeared that the standoff would have no end. Mayor Jackson sent his young chief of staff, Shirley Franklin, to negotiate a settlement. In return for the occupiers leaving the premises, the deal struck required the city to support hundreds of units of supportive housing. And the Welcome House would be the first one. You may recall the Welcome House at the time was a shelter on Memorial Drive. We were going to demolish that and construct a new supportive housing on the site. It was a great plan. I even have a copy of the mayoral proclamation that committed the city to do this. But after a full week, the occupation ended, came off the front news paper, and nothing happened. Weeks went by without any follow-up from City Hall. The advocates who risked so much became restless, irate. By then, that group included a young banker who was chair of the board of PRI. That would be me. And now I had something at stake since PRI was going to be the developer of the new Welcome House. I was a suit. My job was to raise money, not draw attention. And I did not relish, in all honesty, the thought of reoccupying the Imperial, now made much more difficult by the fact that John Portman had cemented concrete block on all the doors and windows of the first 2 floors, but not the third. Yeah. The secret plan that was thus hatched was for several of us, which was really my old best friends, and I won't name them, to slip in the building at night via the 3rd floor using long ladders from my friend's painting contracting business. We would then hang a large banner from the top floor. The banner bore a not-so-subtle warning. Dear Maynard, back to the Imperial, keep your promise. There it is. You can see it there. And you can also see the condition of the building back then. Those are 6 bed sheets, in case you're wondering, sewed together by the little old ladies at the St. Luke's Outreach Committee that I chair. Kid you not. So, as we had hoped, it did make the TV evening news, and then we waited. This time we did not have to wait long before we were summoned down to the mayor's office, and despite many more challenges, the result was a brand new 207-unit Welcome House. And there it is, and that's a contemporary photo. It's still there doing great work at the Memorial and Pryor. And at the grand opening in the spring of 1992, Maynard Jackson proved he had a good sense of humor. You can see, that's me, much younger. And you can't see the photo, but the photo was the photo you saw last. And no secrets were revealed at the time. It was an occasion of fun and celebration. But of course, Mayor Jackson understood the need for affordable housing and became a great supporter, and he also had a great sense of humor. Next up was the Walton House, an abandoned 10-story building in the fairly popular district that PRI put under contract while we were developing the Welcome House. This too ended up as a pitched battle. They all did back then. This time with Central Atlanta Progress, which thought we were going to ruin downtown. Since we were seriously outgunned, we turned to Antioch Baptist Church North as our partner, and thus began My Education About Racial Politics by Joe Beasley, the community activist who I came to know and appreciate, even though he torched me on more than one occasions. Once again, Maynard Jackson came through. At a press conference at 10 o'clock that night, on the steps of the Walton, he pressed the banks to support the project. They did, and the Walton opened its doors, and an additional 120 units of supportive housing was added to the inventory. There's a picture of the Walton. The final act now takes us back to the Imperial, years later. With the Olympics approaching, the entire city was being spruced up, but there was one very noticeable exception. The Imperial remained a derelict hulk, untouched since the occupation. By this time, PRI had acquired a bit of a can-do reputation, but I was very mindful that while we had new friends at City Hall, taking on Mr. Portman again was asking for real trouble. Although he actually didn't own the Imperial, he had constructed the SunTrust Tower right behind it. I'd asked for a meeting with Mr. Portman's executives to see if they would oppose our developing the Imperial into supportive housing, as we had done with the Walton, as we had done with the Welcome House. But fully expecting to be turned down, I walked into the meeting to see A.J. Robinson, who now runs Central Atlanta Progress, and a friend from St. Luke's who turned out to be the head of Mr. Portman's property management company, the very same woman who ordered the doors and windows barricaded. I knew her, much to my surprise. We were friends. I was in the company of friends, and they offered their strong support for our concept for the Imperial. So God does work in mysterious ways. I was floored. So with the support of the Reverend Woody Bartlett, and I'd hope Woody could be here today. There's Woody. Hello, old friend. You remember this? Woody probably came up with $3,000 or $4,000, and we all put it in a pot, and back then that was enough to get it under contract. It's good to see you. Carl Hartrandt, who was then the Commissioner of Housing at the City of Atlanta, and Mayor Bill Campbell, we were able to purchase the building. However, we are facing a much larger redevelopment budget, with the key funding being the low-income housing tax credit. That's the time when that program came along. In another dramatic twist, and I'm afraid I don't have much time for that story, our final piece of funding was a lease for the building during the Olympics, negotiated with none other than the Atlanta Committee for the Olympic Games. So the Imperial opened its door to a joyous celebration late in 1996, adding another 110 units to the supportive housing inventory. That's definitely the after picture you're looking at right now. So you can see why I label this as a resurrection story. New life and hope grew out of despair. I learned about the power of the community pulling together. In addition to over 400 units of supportive housing that I just described, those 4 years launched PRI, made me a houser for life, and left me with a good tale that I can finally tell. Thank you.
Well, the big question we had is, which story should Bruce tell? Because there are 1,000 of them. Great story, and I would come back to my introduction. You know, the proof is in the pudding. The proof is how many units you put into the neighborhood. Bruce developed the largest nonprofit affordable housing development company in the state. So please give Bruce another hand. Now we're going to see another video, and in this case, we're going to talk about the Atlanta Mortgage Consortium. Jim, why not? You're here. Raise your hand or stand up. Jim, you know, back when we couldn't talk to any bankers, they wouldn't talk to us. Jim was the banker we loved. Jim, thank you, and let's see the video.
I called together the group of banks. I got my management to help me get everybody together and send a representative over. And we worked all during the Color of Money series on putting together the Atlanta Mortgage Consortium. And it was announced, I mean, we worked on it a year prior to that, but it was announced before that Color of Money series was completed. And then Atlanta Mortgage Consortium took off, and we met with the forum and out at the food bank, and we listened to all the constituencies in affordable housing and what was working and so forth. And the Atlanta Mortgage Consortium actually had an advisory committee which was made up of many of the same members. Over that period, we probably did $35 million worth of loans. You have to approach housing from, if you want it to be successful at turning an area around, you have to approach it from a holistic standpoint. And I spell holistic, W-H, the whole, and H-O, with some empathy and some morals to it, and really putting the resources that you need to get affordable housing done. We've had some things that work real well in Atlanta, and I think the forum's been responsible for the successes that we've had.
Please thank Jim. As Jim probably remembers, and many of you may remember, there was a series called The Color of Money. And that might not have been the easiest invitation for Jim and SunTrust and the banks to come together, but that's really what it takes sometime, isn't it? It takes holding things up, leveraging that, challenging the status quo, and then coming together as a team. And that's exactly what we did. There was a sense of urgency at that point, just as there is today. So speaking of a sense of urgency, the next person I want to invite to speak is Hatty Dorsen. The reason I mention sense of urgency is if you've ever been on the wrong side of Hattie and her urgency, it is not a good day for you. Hattie was the person in town who would say what needed to be said, who actually helped create Atlanta Neighborhood Development Partnership because we needed to focus on neighborhoods, real people, real housing, instead of talking up here. So Hattie, you've been a leader in so many ways. Thank you for being here today. Please share with us. Should, or talking to it. Is that?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah. To your mouth.
Okay, thank you. Good morning. I remember Bill, and I talked to him a lot about these 7:30 meetings, and I appreciate starting at 9. When I first moved back to Atlanta, I started attending the housing forums. And I got up in the morning and had to get my daughter out and try and make it to these meetings at 7:30. And then asked her, why are we meeting at 7:30 in the morning? I do not wake up talking. But the whole problem that existed in Atlanta at that time was discussed in these housing forums around affordability. My question was, even though we were talking about affordable housing, they were talking in terms of mass units, more than 10, apartment complexes. My focus turned to neighborhoods. And in the audience today is the person I always say, and I give credit to, is Reverend W.L. Cottrell, who was in, stand up, Reverend, who was a pastor in Vine City. And I was minding my business at the Atlanta Economic Development Corporation. He made an appointment to come see me. And when he came to see me, he said, we need your help in Vine City. we need to restore our community. And I said, why are you talking to me? That's not what I do. So he took me off into the side room and gave me, as my daughter used to say, a talking to about what my responsibilities should be and from whence I have come. And so I give credit to Reverend W.L. Cottrell for setting me on that path that became the Atlanta Neighborhood Development Partnership. The neighborhoods in Atlanta that surrounded our downtown were in a state of deterioration. People had moved to the suburbs. They had vacated and left behind mostly low-income and some moderate-income people in the communities like Vine City, English Avenue, Summer Hill, Mechanicsville, the historic district in Tamanika where I met her. All these communities that surrounded our downtown was in a state of despair. The good news was that I returned to Atlanta with some experience of working for a national foundation, having led a corporation at Stanford University around housing and community economic development, and with some ideas on what should be taking place in the city of Atlanta. I visited with M. Tamanika, and with M. Tamanika's, I think her zest for trying to transform and successfully transform it, because we can't afford to live there any longer, the historic district called near Auburn Avenue. So with that conversation with M. Tamanika and all, the ANDP concept came alive, recognizing that the corporate community, the foundation community in Atlanta was not engaged, became, I guess, a quest for me to go after the kind of funding that other communities around the nation were seeking and receiving from foundations and all. So the Woodruff Foundation became a primary target. The Woodruff Foundation, of course you all know, was the largest foundation in Georgia, I believe, as well as housed here in the city of Atlanta. So Pete McTeer at that time became my best friend. And we would sit and talk about what was happening in Atlanta and what was not happening in Atlanta. Out of those conversations, I would say that over a period of time, and somebody could correct me from ANDP, but he invested around $30 million in reviving Atlanta's neighborhoods through the Woodruff Foundation, through the coffers of the Atlanta Neighborhood Development Partnership. The Atlanta Neighborhood Partnership also went after the corporate community and said, your employees live in and around the city of Atlanta. They commute far away to come to work in downtown Atlanta. Let's do something about our neighborhoods. So therefore, the corporate community became engaged and participated in funding the work of ANDP. Therefore, we were able to fund community development corporations that got started under the umbrella of ANDP. So our history, the Atlanta Neighborhood Development Partnership, was long in trying to facilitate the involvement of community about their own destiny. I felt that we could not, from someplace else, say this is what you ought to do. We needed to listen to what they wanted to do. The community development corporations was key to reviving what you see happening in Atlanta. I think as we look forward as to what has happened, great things, yes. But what have we left behind? We have probably left behind people who are still left out. And they have nowhere to turn, because the cycle of evolvement happens. When things happen, you move on to the next stage. I would say to you that affordable housing bill is still as important today as it was yesterday. We have begun to price out people from living within our neighborhoods in the city of Atlanta. So we need to have, as we promoted back in the day, a mixed income strategy that is purposeful. Terry Lee, I call you out because the city is very important to the whole process. That affordability in all of our communities ought to be seen as a given and not something to be afraid of. We once upon a time talked about affordable housing, and people thought about it as, who are you targeting? What people are you talking about bringing into my community? And I said, what difference does it make as long as their aspirations are yours? The aspiration to have safe and decent housing. Safe and decent housing where I can raise my children to attend the right schools that you want your children to attend. And so if we have the commonality of trying to pull together a community that is embracing all people, we had to be intentional in our development process. And so today I still challenge all of you who care and continue to do this work that the job is not yet over. We have got communities like English Avenue, my pastor, Reverend Motley, is here, that is now on the brink of becoming a development that will be embracing all people, I hope. But it won't happen if all high-end housing is built there and no affordable housing. Again, this is where the city and the nonprofit community has a role to play. So I guess in summing up what I just said, the job is not over. There's still work to be done. You as leaders and practitioners need to gather together and still make it happen. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hattie. I love Hattie's stories, and I remember I've been married 43 years. My wife Akika is here, but I remember one of the early advice I got in my marriage: give in early, give in often, everything will be just fine. You know, that was the motto with Hattie. When you go over to Pete McTeer, Pete understood, I've got to invest. Corporations understood they need to invest. Terry, you're lucky you're the only one got called out today by Hattie. So I also want to say, and Hattie, I appreciate this, that the faith community has played such a prophetic role, both ministers here but across the city, and the fact that we're sitting here in a church. Very, very important that we frame this not only as a development issue or quality of life issue, but as a moral issue. And that's what it is. I think we've got another video coming up.
When I first moved to Atlanta in 1999, one of the first civic activities I became engaged with was the Atlanta Housing Forum. That was when I first met Bill Bolling and made a number of other friendships that continue to this day. The Atlanta Housing Forum is unique. I can tell you that there just aren't any other efforts and initiatives like it in cities across this country as a voluntary collaborative effort to bring people together to discuss one of the most important issues facing any region. Over the last several decades, the housing issues facing Atlanta have changed and evolved. Poverty has deepened, inequality has widened. We've realized that the issue of housing is interrelated to other issues like good transit, safe neighborhoods, quality public schools. And the issue has regionalized. So the suburban communities of Atlanta are dealing with affordable housing issues just as much as the urban core is. Through it all, the Atlanta Housing Forum has continued to be a place that people can come to discuss and test issues and solutions to the region's housing problems. And as state and federal government has receded in their ability to help urban regions, the Housing Forum has become the way in which to develop partnerships with local governments to help them find new and better ways to deal with affordable housing. The Atlanta Housing Forum is truly priceless. It costs nothing, and it's the gift that keeps on giving to the Atlanta region.
Please give Ray a hand. You know, Ray's had many different roles, but he was one of those bankers who stepped up, who challenged the status quo in banking, who I think chaired the board of ANDP and played so many roles. So I deeply appreciate Ray Chrisman's support and leadership through the years. M. Tomanika, your organization, Historic District Community Development Corporation, was formed in the 1980s. It's when we first began this conversation. But it was closer to the 90s that resources began to be provided to help CDCs like yours to do the important work of holistic community development. I hope you can share how HDDC was able to help transform Sweet Auburn. And let me just say before M. Tomanika steps up, she was the first who really focused on a neighborhood and created the model that so many of us had followed through the years. So I deeply appreciate that. M. Tomanika, thank you for being here.
Thank you for that.
Is that
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Yeah? Yes, good, well,
Just
good
keep it
morning.
close.
It's on. I'll hold it close. Good morning. This is really interesting. So my story, I think will have 3 themes. The first theme will be it takes a village. The second theme will be that it really is critical that we take the long view. And finally that, as Hattie has so eloquently indicated, the work's not done. So the Historic District Development Corporation was founded in 1980 by, among others, Coretta Scott King. My story began personally. My husband and I, and then my 4-week-old daughter moved into the Historic District because I was from New York and I figured I could live anywhere. But it was tough, rough, and scary. And we had this idea that surely because the National Park Service was there and the King Center was there, and you could see the Hilton Hotel elevators from my back porch, that someone was going to revitalize the neighborhood. We were wrong. Nobody did. And it became clear that if we and our neighbors, who were mostly low-income, long-term senior women who had been in the neighborhood for 30, 40, 50, and 60 years, if we didn't come together to save our neighborhood, it would be lost to then, frankly, prostitutes and drug dealers. So that was the picture. The housing forum that I began to attend gave me this sense of hope that there were people who cared about this, who could help us. Because then, as now, our perspective has always been that community development and community revitalization and the quest for affordability and all that that means should come from the inside out and not from the outside in. And so it was very important that, along with my, as I've described them, neighbors, we charted how our work would be done. But what I learned was that the village was at the housing forum. And the over 150 houses we've renovated or built and thousands of square feet that we've added in commercial and multifamily housing really began with the acquisition that was facilitated by the Atlanta Land Bank Authority. We owe much of what we were able to do to a land bank that was thought of and then ultimately delivered through the housing forum. I learned the critical importance of good planning from Clara Axum and the Corporation for Olympic Development in Atlanta while we were leading the effort to do redevelopment plans in both Butler Auburn and the Old Fourth Ward. It really charted the way we as an organization did our work and recognizing that good planning was critical. Bruce was fearless, and I remember going by the Imperial and seeing that sign, and I was like, wow. there are folks who really get this and who are willing to put themselves out. Bruce also was on our board for a while, and so his expertise, his fight, his approach really insinuated itself in the work that we did. And then there was Bill Bolling, who was this guy with this heart who would not give up and who cared about people the same way we did. And it was a light that helped certainly me understand that at the end of the day, if you really care about people and spend your life working at that, you can be rewarded in more ways than you know. And so this village that's here really has a great deal to do with the success that we've had in Sweet Auburn. What I haven't talked about was resources. None of this would have happened without ANDP. We had been trying to get money to hire staff for some time, and we were turned down. ANDP was a kind of a light in the wilderness for community development corporations and the work that Hattie spearheaded around focusing on communities, on neighborhoods at the neighborhood level was something that no one had done before. And without those resources, and both in terms of finances and personnel, I mean, ANDP threw its weight behind our work, and to a great extent, the ability that we've had to change not just the Martin Luther King Historic District or Sweet Auburn, but actually the old Fourth Ward, really owes a lot to that. So that was the village. It really is a story of folks being willing to step up when they see a spark that really came out of the community to make sure that the work that we had done was for the community and not for some other ideal that often happens. So that's the village. Additionally, when I think about what it took, we had done good planning. We had been able to do, for years, historic renovations. What we had no clue about doing was new construction, because our neighborhood had just as many vacant lots as it had dilapidated, unfortunately, deteriorated housing. And so working with then Nations Bank and eventually Bank of America, in a really unique partnership that they touted nationally, we were able to really do whole blocks in our neighborhood at a time, creating our block-by-block strategy where we did historic renovations as HDDC, and our partnership did new construction so that we could transform in whole blocks in 12 to 18 months, and just continue to do that throughout the neighborhood until the work was done. So the village is the core, I think, for how we do our work, never forgetting that we do it for the community and with the community, and that we really need to be led by the community. This notion of, outside interest determining that it's time for a community to be revitalized is one way to do it. I think the most successful and the most important way to do it is from the inside out. So that's the village, because the village starts in the neighborhood. The other thing I want to talk about, which has served us well, is the notion of the long view. The Historic District Development Corporation is 38 years old this month, almost today. Today's the 5th, almost today. And while we can institute approaches and ideas that serve 10, 15 years, there are, subsidy requirements, we are into a whole nother generation. It's 30 years since the forum began its work, and we still have families and neighborhoods that need affordability, that need economic development, and that need the work that we began 30 years ago. And if we don't think about taking the long view with respect to affordability and economic development that is not kind of implemented on neighborhoods or on the city, but implemented, at the neighborhood level, we'll be having this conversation for the next 90 years. Because the long view is how neighborhoods grew and existed. I mean, all the communities we're talking about, began in the late 1800s. I mean, Mechanicsville and Historic District and Summerhill and places like that. These were neighborhoods that are generations old. And the issues that we're trying to address didn't happen overnight. Our solutions have to be long-term and not overnight kinds of solutions. So that is I think the basis for our success. We've not given up. Part of my kind of personal goal as I try really hard to retire, is to leave younger, enthusiastic, and committed leadership to carry on this work, because it's not done. Finally, when I look out and see the folks in this room, some of you who I know from a very long time ago, and I think about the work that we've done together, either in AHAND or with the city of Atlanta. I mean, the folks who are in this room really have the ability to make the change that we say we want to be. The question is, how committed are we to doing that, and are we willing to do what it takes? And the Housing Forum and these pioneers sitting next to me are examples of what can be done when you decide that there's no such thing as you can't. My perspective has always been, where there is a will, there is a way. And I think that the folks in this room recognize that, and I'm glad you're here to to continue to support this work. Thank you.
Thank you, Antonica. I always try to end the forum with some kind of inspiring, just remember what she said. She did it. A couple of things I want to say, though. The importance of the voice of the neighborhood and the community, that it's bottom up and not top down. That is the message. The importance of women leading, as my two sheroes and many others in the room stepped in and was that leader, both to hear the voice of the community, but then to go out and challenge the status quo, to speak truth to power. Both Tomanika, and Bruce, Hattie, and Frank have done that. So please give them a hand again. So I'm just looking at my clock, and we're actually on time. Unbelievable. Which means, who's got a mic? Video first. Who's up? John O'Callahan from ANDP.
Over the past 30 years, the Housing Forum has educated folks on what community needs are, brought best practices to Atlanta, and spurred important new initiatives that have made a difference in countless people's lives. Going forward, our job is to bring that work to scale and to create and preserve units in a way that we haven't before to meet the full needs of Metro Atlanta. ANDP looks forward to working with the partners here today and new partners that come on board over the next 30 years.
So I'm going to take a chance here. We're going to do a few questions. That means you can ask any of our panelists. This is not where I need a lecture or a 5-minute preview to your question. If there's any clarifying or any questions anybody has of our panelists, this is your opportunity. Just raise your hand. Anybody? One right back here with the mic close to your mouth so we can hear. And just tell us who you are.
Good morning, and thank you, all of you, for being here today and sharing your stories with us. They're so powerful
And you
so
are.
uplifting. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I am a graduate student at Georgia Tech. I'm in city and regional planning. And so my question to you is, have you seen any cities that inspired you or that gave you an example for the Atlanta region to say, this is something we can actually do and make happen here? Or was it all organic? Were there any other inspiring stories around the country that you perhaps look to as a model or as an example?
Anybody? Frank.
I work in cities across the United States. I'm more involved outside Atlanta than in Atlanta in the last 20 years. And I have to say that every city where I work, I find inspiration. Largely because of what y'all were talking about, the people on the street. Most recently for me, that's been in San Juan. Just in the neighborhoods in San Juan where there are thousands of vacant and abandoned properties, not from Maria, but from long-term disinvestment. But the spirit of the people in the neighborhood that M. Dominica was referring to, that's a source of inspiration. I'm hesitant ever to suggest one model or one activity in one city is what Atlanta should do, because Atlanta's unlike any other city. No two cities are the same. But we have a great deal to learn from. In this state alone, some of the things that are happening in Columbus or Dublin, Georgia, or Valdosta, Georgia, have a lot to teach us from these other communities. So as we drill down into very specific nitty-gritty things, yes, what we've done in land banking here, we've learned from other states. What we do with supportive housing, we've always learned. But I'll stop there.
I was going to add to it. I believe that the models from other cities, taking a look at it is very important. I don't believe that we would have started the Community Development Corporation movement in the city of Atlanta if models had not existed in other cities of how to work in neighborhoods. The belief that you, as M. Tamanika described, the people, the will of the people who live there should be heard as to what they saw they needed, and not someone from City Hall or some other place determining what they should do. And so it has to come from within a community in order to see real change happen, and not to take it for granted that, as one person said to me way back then, that's the way they want it to be. You can't accept that kind of simple statement and say that's the way these communities want to be. Nobody wants to live in poverty. Nobody wants to live in low-income and abandoned neighborhoods. How do we begin to restore our communities in a city that was at the beginning of a boom again? Clara Axum said it best, is that our city, after the Olympics, had a great change coming along. How do we, as in neighborhoods, take advantage? And I believe that that conversation began to take place in the neighborhoods that you now see you can't afford to live in.
And really the power of association is that we continue to learn from each other. Any other questions? I'll just take a few more right here.
Hi, good morning. Every one
And
of
you are?
I am Lise Marie Davis. I work with Atlanta Mission in homelessness. Each one of you mentioned an emerging partnership that occurred over your time in this, whether it's foundations and corporations, partnerships with your neighbors, you know, the mayor. What do you see as emerging partnerships and opportunities that are out there now for us to be working together on?
I'll start the answer there. There's something that many of you have heard about and participated in. It's called House Atlanta. Again, 30 years hanging out, looking for new ideas, new answers, and this is the city coming together, the so-called Big Tent. The House Atlanta, Sarah Kirsch is right up in the front row. Sarah helped lead it with the Urban Land Institute, Frank Fernandez with the Blank Foundation. It's the most hopeful thing I've seen in 30 years because the whole city now has coalesced around one effort, because the business community understands it, the neighborhood groups understand it, the nonprofits, everybody understands the issue that we have. So it's the biggest, widest partnership that I've seen, and it's the most hopeful thing. However, now the soapbox, it won't happen unless this community insists that this is the window and we're going to drive it through, because we all know where we're going to go if we don't. This city is booming. It's a global city, and it's going to leave a lot of people behind. The work's not finished. And yet, we're the ones that say to our leadership, we need this. We need to drive this through. We need more affordable housing.
Another question right here.
Hi, I'm Alexis from the Sturgis group, and I guess I have a question for everyone. Sorry about that. At the last forum, I spoke and I raised questions about the marginalized people experiencing homelessness, which generally tend to be people who are already established but simply don't meet the qualifications for affordability. And in that time, I have begun an organization to kind of develop something for those marginalized people. We've solidified an internship program.
And your question is?
Sorry, we've acquired property. And I just wanted to know, for new entities that are not nonprofit but do have creative solutions, what organizations would you all suggest that I begin to look to for partnerships?
Now the partnership question, folks.
Well, I mean, my perspective is pretty, simple. Where are you working? With whom are you working? And your partnerships should begin with the organizations, the groups of folks in neighborhoods, because sometimes they're not a formal organization, but they're a group of people doing good work. I would always suggest that you begin with the folks and with the people. Homelessness has been a long and in some ways a seemingly intractable issue in Atlanta, but we continue to work on it, which is, the important aspect of it. And I think that, reaching out both to local groups and organizations, but also trying to become a part of the larger effort is certainly a more likely winning strategy than not. Okay?
Let me just add a little context. Some of you may remember the task force of the homeless started out of the food bank. It was based there and then spun out and has done its work through the years. The housing forum really came out of an awareness that for the homeless it comes down to housing, doesn't it? But it's not that simple. So one of the things we've done at the housing forum, we've often focused on mental health. We focus on finance. We focus on transportation choices, and we don't have that many up. We've focused on education. So all these things are connected. A real challenge for us here is finding the right language, right, that everybody's included in the circle. There's a point I was going to make at the end, but I'll make it right now. That if you're sitting there as a homeless advocate or a homeless person, most important, or a banker or a minister, oftentimes we have a hard time talking to each other. And that really is the challenge, to create the table where everybody's welcome in a way that we both respect and understand each other's perspective. Very important. I'm going to try to get a couple more questions in. There was one in the back, and I will come back to you. Grab one of them.
Good morning, everybody. I'm David. I'm a senior at Emory University, and I'm doing affordable housing work in Buford Highway as part of the Community Building Social Change Program. And so I wanted to hear your perspective about ensuring affordability for undocumented and mixed status residents and families.
A special category of folks who need housing. Anybody speak to that? Good Emory student, Frank, so you better answer.
The issue is so important. But perhaps I speak as a law professor from Emory in saying that that needs to be broken into several different components. One is to deal with the existing legal structures that oppress the non-documented. Because unless we're going to confront the need to change our existing legal and social systems that oppress the non-documented, it doesn't make any difference how much affordable housing we do. And it's only in the recent past that our legislatures, our public leaders, tried to require landlords to screen out non-documented. So the first is, for me, that system. The second, particularly in the Buford Highway corridor, is the need to be able to construct affordable housing the way that many of you have done. Different forms of affordable housing in that corridor. But the third is what I've only recently begun to do, which is what you have always admonished me, which is to listen as you work with the non-documented. I spent a good bit of yesterday listening and learning from two non-documented who've been here for 20 years and are in incredible fear every time they go out on the street. So that's just a quick reaction from me personally. But I hope that conversation becomes a conversation for the forum.
Thank you, Frank. One more question right here.
Hello, I'm Camille Kessler. I am a former president of the Junior League of Atlanta. I see Ann Kramer here. And I'm currently executive director of a small nonprofit, Rebuilding Together Atlanta. We're a national group of affiliates, and we're it for the city of Atlanta. And my question for any of you is, we talked about helping people who are renters, who need affordable housing. What do we need to do for people who are homeowners? So Rebuilding Together renovates homes for low-income homeowners throughout the city of Atlanta. We had a grant to help renovate homes for multi-generational families in Edgewood. We couldn't find any multi-generational low-income homeowners in Edgewood. So how do we help homeowners in neighborhoods that have already gentrified to be able to remain in their homes? So how do we tackle that? Are those neighborhoods just gone? Or rock on. All right, so how do we help those?
How do we help people from being displaced? Is that what I hear you say?
Speak up, Hattie.
I think that's the next challenge.
Hattie, speak.
That's the next challenge we face, is how do we keep people in changing environments? I look again, I keep pointing back to Reverend Cottrell and Vine City. And even where we are in Tamanica, the historic district, how do we keep what we call a mix of incomes is, I think, our challenge, because human nature is to take advantage of higher profits. I can get more from my house, but the question I ask, if you want to remain in the city of Atlanta, where do you go? Because affordability is disappearing. And I think that my belief is that it has to be intentional. And I go back to people like Terry Lee. Housing policy that makes certain that affordability remains within the city of Atlanta, close to employment opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. So the challenge has, I think, Bill, the other round table ought to be, how, in fact, do we keep affordability in the mix? We tackled, bringing housing into the city. Now it's becoming an unaffordable place, pushing people further out into the suburbs. I think that's our next challenge.
I always notice when I'm with Hattie, I get an assignment. So there's the new housing.
Bill.
Him, Tamanica. I want to just say something before you started, okay? This is a key question, and it does deserve our focus, both at this forum or maybe another forum as you've suggested.
So gentrification, which is, a process of revitalization that displaces people in the process. It's the difference between gentrification and revitalization. And so there are basically kind of three elements of it. One is, our renters whose rents are increased and they have to go. Homeowners for whom taxes become untenable and then they're forced to leave. And then there are commercial neighborhood serving businesses that also have their rents increased and they have to leave, or they have the issue of increased taxes. So recognizing that that's at the heart of why people aren't able to remain in their neighborhoods, those are the places we need to address. So it's a public policy, which Hattie kind of alluded to. It's a public policy issue. What do we do if the issues are increased rents and unaffordable taxes? How do we approach those from a public policy perspective? Because the market will do what the market does. The notion of caring about people staying in their homes and in their businesses is a public policy question that needs to be addressed. And I think that, it's not the future, it's the current issue we're dealing with, I believe, in Atlanta.
Thank you. And it's going to throw me way off, but where is John Almond? Where are you sitting, John? John, give John a mic. Do you know John Almond, to your question? Because, John, this is a 5-minute answer that I want you to take 1 minute on. But this has been a focus of the Westside Future Fund on the West Side. How do we keep the folks in the neighborhood? What have you guys done there?
So the question around community engagement?
Well, it's how do we keep people there? As the neighborhood gentrifies, as M. Tomanika said, the market will be the market. How do we keep people there? You've set up a fund. That's what I want to hear.
In the 4 neighborhoods the Westside Future Fund is targeting, 93% of the residents are renters. Of that 93%, 20% on protected land owned by Atlanta Housing and Quest, and now also the Westside Future Fund, which means 72% are in properties owned by investors who are aligned to profit. And so most of these renters earn under $20,000 a year. Minimum wage is $13,000 annually. Federally poverty rate is $25,000. Where land prices are rapidly escalating, there is no formula that does not have subsidy. You have to go buy the land. You can't take it. There's no rent control. And back to Mayor Bottom's very courageous, push on the subsidy. And so a key part is philanthropy that can go buy quick, because appropriately so, government money moves slow through approval processes, et cetera, and then partner with government to rehabilitate. But the clock, with Atlanta winning with so many people moving in, which is terrific, the downside is rapidly escalating real estate prices. So you just got to go buy unless someone changes the Constitution and we can just go take it.
So I would encourage folks, there's another forum that meets every other week, Westside Future Fund. That's where that conversation is happening. Real time, real neighborhood, a real challenge for us. Please thank the panel again. Got another video. All right, I think a video is coming up.
Greetings on behalf of the City of Lithonia. The convening of the 30th anniversary of the Atlanta Regional Housing Forum is taking place at a very critical moment. The efforts to provide decent, safe, and affordable housing throughout the Metro Atlanta region continues to intensify as communities are faced with the double challenge of redevelopment and gentrification. Those of us who are policy leaders must redouble our efforts with those who are committed to developing strategies to create communities of opportunities for all, regardless of socioeconomic status. I look forward to continuing to participate in these discussions and urge my fellow elected officials and others to join us in this endeavor in the years to come.
Another one of my sheroes, and I think Mayor Jackson is in the room. Are you here? Please stand. Thank you. When we talk about needing political leadership, people that really have influence in a place like Lithonia, Mayor Jackson has been that person. She fully participates in this forum, and I think is a key person that other mayors are looking to around the region. Okay, I'm a little behind because I went off script, but we're going to pivot a little bit to kind of looking to the future. This has been a great kind of forum to look at the past and celebrate, but who are our leaders as we look to the future, and what are those issues? First person up, Leonard Adams of Quest Communities. Leonard, you're in the line of local heroes like Janice Ware and M. Tomanika Youngblood, who have committed to a particular community for the long haul. What are the keys to making a difference in your community? Your community is over on the west side. What should we do differently in the future?
Thank you, Bill. Can you guys hear me? Thank you, pioneers. It's an honor to be in a line with such great pioneers here. Dr. King once said that almost always the creative, dedicated minority can change the world, and this is what we saw up here. What can we do different, and what are some of the keys there? When I think about it, oh my God, it's been 30 years of these individuals working here, and on one hand, I am just so honored to hear that, but I did hear in their story that there is some barriers that continue to follow us, and we have to get that right? So we have to get out of our own way, and we have to expand on the opportunity window that's now. We're talking about me up here as a future leader. I can't do 30 more years of going through all of these hurdles and all of these hiccups, right? To be here 30 years later to tell everyone, you're going to go through all these hurdles. So let's get them right. What we're doing on the west side is adopting a community, staying there for the long term. I would challenge us to strategically, as a city, strategically and intentionally, is what you heard from these pioneers. Be involved and strategically invest in the community-based nonprofits and the service providers. Those are the groups that are there for the long haul. They're there, that's for transformative change, and that's a long-term period. That's not surface change. Surface change, we can go out here and house that homeless person that we saw on the street out of the parking lot and get them in the house. That's just surface. But committing to that for the long term is going to be transformational. Sorry about that. Was there any other parts to that question?
Well, I didn't want you to go on forever, but that was the question.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Another one of my heroes on the west side, Leonard Adams. Thank you very much. I think we got a video coming up.
Okay, the advice I have for the emerging leaders is basically we need some emerging leaders to step up. And so in that regard, it's great that we have people like Dan Emmergluck teaching undergraduate students about housing and community development. But my advice to them is really just to remember that this problem did not occur overnight. We will not end it overnight. We're celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Regional Housing Forum. So that gives you some idea of the perseverance and diligence that is needed to continue to attack this problem. I used to think that we could actually never address poverty. We could never address housing affordability. But if we don't have that vision if we don't think that this problem can be solved, we will continue with half-hearted measures. So I guess my advice succinctly is to keep the faith and persevere onward.
Dan Emmergluck's Contemporary U.S. Cities class.
So in class we've learned a little bit about the suburbanization of poverty. How has the housing market in the suburbs responded to the new suburban demographic?
My question is, will the Gulch accept Section 8 vouchers and housing?
Hi, I'm interested in knowing what everybody's expectations are of the new Chief Housing Officer for the City of Atlanta.
The suburbanization of poverty. How is housing market in the suburbs responding to the new suburban demographic? Larry Keating, an emerging leader right here from Georgia Tech. Could you say a few words, Larry?
Thanks, Bill. My name's Larry Keating. I was at Georgia Tech for about 30 years. I'm no longer there, doing private work.
Close to.
All right. While there, I founded, with some other folks, the Community Design Center of Atlanta. We tried to do the things that M. Dominique and others were talking about, that is, put communities first and redevelop in their interests. What I want to mention here, and I've been doing this for a long time at a lot of housing forums, and those of you who are my age have heard this before, but it hasn't changed. In spite of all the accomplishments of the people who are here, for the last 40 years, there's been over 50,000 households who have severe housing problems in the city of Atlanta and who have incomes less than 50% of the area median income. That's around $33,000 for a family of three. Here's the real punchline. 50% of the people who have, 50% of the renters who have severe housing problems have incomes less than 30% of the area median income. That is around $20,000 for a three-person family. The base problem that we started attacking 30, 40 years ago is still there. We got to focus more precisely, more rigorously, more actively on the lowest of the low income. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Another easy question. Will the Gulch accept Section 8 vouchers? Let's see. Terry Lee.
So we see in 30 years the forum has not changed its approach, right? Before I even answer that question, Bill, I'm just really sitting here in awe and in amazement of the foundation that has just been led for us. And I thank Hattie, I thank Tamanika, I thank Bruce, I thank Frank. Larry, I thank you. I remember when I first came to Atlanta, you gave me a hard time, but I appreciate that hard time. And Bill, because that hard time is what has made me not only accountable to my role, but to the city and to the people who actually deserve the help that we can give. So the question on whether or not the Gulch will accept Section 8 vouchers, the answer is yes. And we have Brandon Riddick Seals here. The one thing about the Gulch I'll tell you is there's a 30% affordability requirement on the Gulch. 30%. That's higher than any other percentage we have in any publicly funded transaction that we've done here in the city. 20% for folks at 80% or below AMI, 10% of the housing will absolutely be dedicated to folks at 30% of AMI. And that's not all, okay? We also have about $40 million in a trust fund, $28 million which will go towards affordable housing, $12 million or so will go towards economic opportunities. Is that enough? Many of you would say no, but it is a start, and it is a down payment and a seed investment on what we can do when we get serious about affordability in the city. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you, Terry. Now I'm going to come back to you in a few minutes to kind of ask priorities in your new job, but I'm going to answer the last question. What are the expectations of the new housing officer, in the city of Atlanta? I'll answer that. She walks on water. She reads minds. A strong influence of the mayor who made the commitment. Actually, we're with you all the way, Carrie. And we expect a lot from you, and you should expect a lot from us. Thank you. Let's see, Sarah Kirsch, you were already mentioned, and House ATL. You and Frank Fernandez. Frank would be here, but the Blank Foundation is having its board meeting today. He thought he should be there for his boss. I'm on the board. I should be there too, but I'm here. In an unprecedented move, House ATL process over the last 6 months brought together a broad cross-section of the community for the first time to come up with a plan. What, in your opinion, are the 3 most important recommendations? And I think there were 19 or 21. What are the 3 most important recommendations contained in the House ATL report? Sarah Kirsch, ULI.
Thank you. Well, good morning. It is such a privilege to be with you all and to be with this remarkable group of leaders who've really led the way in the work that we continue today. I joked, we had 23 recommendations coming out of House ATL, and asking me my favorite 3 are like asking me the favorite of my 3 children. You know, they each pull at your heart in a different way, and you want them all to be successful. That said, I will use a term that preachers often use, which is a first among equals. And there are 3 that I would highlight. One is kicking off next week, and that is the formation of a funders collective. And as I believe is already mentioned by John Amman, you know, we've got this goal of $500 million of private resources, $500 million of public resources to achieve 2,000 plus units created and preserved over the next 10 years. That's annually, I should say. So we need to be coordinated. We need to leverage those public resources, both funding, land, other assets. We need to bring to bear new private resources, and then of course we need to leverage philanthropic investments. So that Funders Collective that Megan at Enterprise Community Partners will be leading kicks off next week of how we can be more coordinated in making sure we achieve those goals. So I'd highlight that as first. The second, which has been mentioned a couple of times this morning, is a comprehensive anti-displacement initiative. That's being led by Odetta McLeish-White, who I think you'll hear from later, and with Transformation Alliance, and Michael Lucas with Atlanta Volunteer Lawyers. And that is about how we make sure we can have that investment without displacement. So I'm going to add you to the group. And it's so critical for right now, right? And then the third I would highlight has also been mentioned. I think it was M. Tamanika who first brought it up, and I was sharing with Jim Durrett. I unearthed yesterday a report from 2001 from when he was leading the Urban Land Institute, and the first recommendation was to reevaluate how we do community engagement in neighborhood planning to achieve affordable housing goals. And there is work that's being led by the Center for Civic Innovation on how we can reevaluate that engagement to make sure we're being led by the community. And so those are 3. You know, I could go on for a while, but I think without those, you know, it's goals.
Where would they find this information?
Sure. So House ATL is an active website. You can find all the recommendations. You can sign up to get more information. Our next convening will be January 16th at the Gathering Spot. It's open, come one, come all. And if you want to participate in any of that work, you know, just include that in a note. And you know, these ongoing working groups are open as well, as long as you're willing to help with the lift.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
I think we've got another video from Michael Dobbins. You know, Michael was the planning director for the city. He's now a Georgia Tech professor. I noticed the Larry Keatings and the Michael Dobbins are not afraid to call me up and ask me what I'm doing lately for affordable housing. You're going to hear Mike ask that question again. It's the video.
Hi, Mike Dobbins here from Georgia Tech. Happy to be celebrating the Regional Housing Forum's 30-year effort to first warn us and then take actions with respect to our growing affordable housing crisis, a marker in our position at the bottom of the nation among cities, according to Bloomberg, for wealth divide. Along with jobs and health and education and access to them, the forum has done its level best to mitigate the ravages of poverty related to housing sufficiency. Still, 25% of our population is living in poverty, victims of the wealth divide, and only 4% of our kids growing up in poverty are given a chance of escaping it, according to a Harvard-Berkeley study. Our hopes rose with the 2017 election when most of the candidates, thanks to this group, lifted housing affordability to the forefront of their campaign issues. So far, however, it's really disheartening to see the follow-through. The Gulch Project, for example, does nothing directed at reducing the wealth gap. In fact, is very likely to continue to widen it. We have to get the city to use its financial resources and capabilities, its approval authorities, to redirect some of our priorities, especially now when we have a booming development economy, to directly impact in a positive way mitigation of our wealth gap, which I consider to be our greatest threat to sustainability and even civility as a city.
Thank you, Michael Dobbins. Michael couldn't be here today, but I encourage you to audit his class. It'll make a radical out of you. So, but doesn't he get right down to it? It's the growing gap between the haves and have-nots. I mean, there's less and less even of a middle class who can afford a home today. So thank you, Michael Dobbins. I want to come back to Terry Lee. Welcome to the City of Atlanta's new Chief Housing Officer. Terry, given the attention. Terry, given the attention and focus on housing in the last year and the momentum in 2018, the recommendations of House ATL and the elevation of housing in the mayor's cabinet, what are your top 3 priorities?
Awesome. Thank you again, Bill. So I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Mike Dobbins, who I think is absolutely one of the most phenomenal planning commissioners that the City of Atlanta has had. And I absolutely respect Mike's opinion, but what Mike does for me every time I hear him speak is really challenges me to be different, right? And that's what it's going to take in Atlanta right now. So to your point earlier, I do not walk on water. I'm so grateful we're in the church so I can say that. Also, as the Chief Housing Officer, I am not doing this alone. But for Brandon, Eloisa, Clyde, many of you in this room, Sarah, Megan, and my old guard that definitely keeps me straight, there's absolutely nothing that we will be able to accomplish here within the city. So when I think about where we're going from a city's perspective, it is absolutely critical that we look at how we provide a pathway for meaningful, affordable, equitable access for anybody that wants to call Atlanta home, right? That's critical. So how do we do it? You know, we talked a little bit about, earlier someone spoke about the galvanizing effort around Mayor Bottom's $1 billion challenge. That's critical. We need resources. But not only do we need more resources, we need to maximize the existing resources we have, right? So we have existing public resources, we have existing public land that can be either used for affordable housing or community development opportunities to build neighborhoods. We have to make that a primary focus. We have to look at what could be some viable solutions to address affordable housing. Hattie said it right, and Tamanika said it right. It is a public policy issue, right? So what public policy can we put in place to be different? House ATL did a lot of work, and what I'm pleased to say is that we're not reinventing the wheel, because many of us served with House ATL, but we're taking that work and we're identifying the just categories that the city can effectively mobilize. And the ones that we cannot effectively lead and mobilize, we're looking to see how we facilitate that change. And then the last, but this is probably what most of you really want to hear about, is coordination and capacity, okay? We have 5 agencies here within the City of Atlanta that are entrusted with the responsibility to provide affordable housing. We have Atlanta Housing, Invest Atlanta, the Atlanta Beltline, the Department of City Planning, as well as the Fulton County Land Bank Authority. So how can we all work differently together, understanding that it's absolutely not about any of us, but it's about the people that trust us and that we're supposed to serve on a daily basis to provide affordable housing opportunities. This work will not be easy, but it is absolutely critical and necessary in order for us to build the Atlanta that we not just want for today, but the Atlanta that we want to be tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Let's have another message from James Alexander.
Congratulations to the Regional Housing Forum for 30 years in that anniversary. I really consider the Regional Housing Forum to be the heart and soul of addressing affordable housing and housing issues in the Atlanta metropolitan area. My question is, what's it going to take for us to not need the Regional Housing Forum 30 years from now when the problem is solved in many ways? So when in the future we think about affordable housing in the way that we think of the measles now as something that is a solved problem and issue. Thank you very much.
Ooh, big question. Big question. Are we going to still need a housing forum in 30 years? Leave it to James to ask that question from Mercy Housing. William McFarland, housing advocate, consultant, brother in the work. You, like veterans like Kate Little and Deborah Scott, for literally decades have leveraged your extensive knowledge about housing policy by using your voice to advocate for policy. You showed up, William, and you showed up today. Looking back, what would you have done differently in hopes of instigating more change? As a bridge person yourself, how important is the Big Ten in fulfilling the promises of ATL?
Well, thanks for asking the question, Bill, and I appreciate being here this morning as well. You know, back when I started in the community development field, we focused our work on uplifting the interest and lifting the voices of the residents in the communities where we served. So we were using our education, our experience, and our expertise to do research, to gather data, to consult, and then to package that information from communities for politicians and corporations and others. We were doing the work of the people. But there existed a better delivery system for community-based advocacy then, I think, than there is now. We had people like Larry Keating at Georgia Tech, and we had Bill Bolling at the Housing Forum, and Frank Alexander, and Robert Bullard at Clark Atlanta University, and Max Creighton at the Community Design Center, and others that really worked to help to empower communities and residents in ways that could push not only affordable housing development, but policy development. They were followed very closely then by the Hatty Dorsens and the Lawrence Andersons and the Clara Axums that not only financed the production of affordable housing, but also financed the training and the advocacy work that was kind of needed to push it and to support it. So we had many very important pieces under the tent in terms of advocates, community development professionals, and residents. And then what happened? The Olympics came and went. Corporation funding kind of waned. Funding intermediaries ceased to be kind of funding intermediaries. The Carter Project and the Empowerment Zone came and then vanished. So now we're in a position where we're actually almost opposite of what we used to be. You know, we have this burgeoning coalition of people who are talking about affordable housing, how important it is, what the need for it is. But there is no absolute certainty as to whose interest is being served and whose voice is being lifted. You know, this affordable housing thing didn't become very important until middle-class people couldn't afford the housing in Atlanta, right? Which is not a bad thing, but while there are some very important and great efforts to train and empower communities and residents, I'm not sure that we have the support system that's there so that there can be applied learning at the end. You know, you can help train somebody, but then do you help them along the way as they try and reach their objective. And so what I would say in closing, because I know I talk probably a little bit too much, is that where is the community development funding? You know, where is the funding and support for leadership development, for advocacy training? That's the kind of support and the kind of resources I think that we need now that we don't have, because what we need under the tent is the community. The community is not necessarily under this tent, and that is the broad-based participation we need in order to really make this happen in a successful way.
Thank you, William McFarland. I'm going to look now to Andrea Pinnabell, from the president of South Face. Andrea. Affordable housing practitioners were early adopters of both energy-efficient buildings and transient-oriented development, as both practices lowered the living costs for low-income families. Both trends are now mainstream, and Southwade played a major role. But what is next? Continuing to educate about the advantages of sustainability? Are there new technologies? Are there new ways that we need to look at this work? Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. And you know, Southface has been a long supporter of sustainability and affordable housing, and I have to give homage to one of the other pioneers, Dennis Creech, who long before I was at Southface has been at that housing forum for 30 years. So I know Dennis is back there.
Dennis, stand up.
Very humble. And I think that, you know, from a sustainability perspective, we think about affordable housing not from numbers of housing, but actually how much does it take to operate and maintain those homes. So energy efficiency, water efficiency, quality constructed housing that is efficient and healthy is really important about total affordability. So I would say the developers in the affordable housing world have been really good about embracing sustainability, thinking about the long-term affordability, but I think there's a real opportunity to go deeper and go further into that. One of the things that we think about at Southface, and I know many of you think about, is energy burden. So City of Atlanta and Atlanta Metro has the third highest energy burden in the country. So what does that mean? That means that there's parts of the city that over 10% of their monthly income goes to energy. So what's happening a lot is that these families are having to choose whether to turn on their air conditioning or put food on the table, or medicine for their children, or books or clothing. And so in a hot, humid climate like we have here in the southeast, what that means is that they are putting that food on the table, they're not turning on their air conditioning because of the high energy burden costs. That creates mold. Mold is an asthma trigger. Their healthcare costs go up. And so I think one of the things that affordable housing developers in this community really need to think about is this notion of total affordability and looking at energy efficiency, quality housing that will then also produce long-term health benefits and stability for those families. So that's opportunity number one. I think the other thing we need is additional investment from not only our utility, but also from our city partners. Looking at programs like the low-income tax credit program, which is very important to ensuring that the development and the banking community actually have the resources to create total affordability, and ensuring those actually have criteria and accountability within those low-income tax credit programs. So we need to go deeper there. We also need to go deeper into energy efficiency programs for renters. There's a split incentives issue between renters and homeowners. The homeowners get the benefits, the renters don't, and so therefore they're not actually investing in these homes. And so having these opportunities for both the rental community as well as the homeowner community to get energy efficiency and weatherization within these low-income homes is important. And I would be remiss also if I didn't mention not only energy efficiency ready, but solar ready. Looking at the resiliency of these homes and the resiliency of these communities, having opportunity for solar, having opportunity for battery storage so that when we do have more storms, more frequent storms, these communities can get up and running faster. And in terms of kind of the next and deeper, I would say net zero. We do have a lot of affordable units, not just in Atlanta, but across the country, looking at what does that mean for net zero or even net positive, and what that really could do to free up and give the freedom to the people who are living in these affordable housing units. Thank you.
And Andrea, just a second, because the question is, where would this conversation continue to take place? So I know there's a place to do that, your sustainability plan.
Yeah, so like the Westside Future Fund, we also have a Sustainable Atlanta Roundtable that takes place at South Face the first Friday of the month, and we do talk a lot about all issues, not only policy related, but things that are important to this community, including affordable housing. So thanks for the plug.
Thank
Bill.
you. Another place you need to show up. So our last video is coming up from Odetta McLeish-White.
I want to send my heartfelt congratulations to the Regional Housing Forum for its 30 years of service to Metro Atlanta's housing and affordable housing community. Those of you who know my work might know me as someone that focuses on the city of Atlanta, but the truth is I live in East Cobb. And just yesterday, I was able to walk my daughter to school in the morning, and this is my backyard. I would love to think that every family in the Metro Atlanta region has great choices for housing, school, transit, and that's why I'm so glad to know that looking forward, the Regional Housing Forum will be around to create brave and safe spaces for all of us to explore new ideas, collaborate on solutions, and be honest about the things that are holding us back and the ways that we can move forward together to make this a better region for everybody.
Let's give Odetta a hand. So another person who's just laser focused on housing and transportation. As you know, we've done transportation here at the Housing Forum. They go hand in hand. Can't think of a better person than Megan Shannon Volovic from Enterprise Community Foundation. First, let me thank Megan. You were one of the sponsors of today's event, so we got a lot more bells and whistles today. It cost us a little bit of money. Actually, Enterprise has been the single most important one-stop shop in affordable housing, covering both policy and funding. We need more enterprises going forward. Megan, if you could design an organizational chart for the field, what would it look like? What, in your mind, are the three most essential new elements we need in Atlanta to drive more robust, affordable housing and community development? Thank you, Megan.
Thank you, Bill. And like others, thank you to Bill, Bruce, Frank, Hattie, and Tamanika, legend leaders who have paved the path forward for us. So thank you. So we are a part of House ATL. And in House ATL, we recognize that in order to strengthen the affordable housing production and preservation system, our approaches and strategies now have to leverage the power of the marketplace, right? So looking at how we leverage public and private resources. And in moving our field forward, three elements that could put a path forward for us include one, a predictable and transparent ecosystem. And what does that mean? That means mapping processes for our private and our public funding sources, creating an affordable housing database, and then also looking at a pipeline project tracker that holds us accountable to measuring our goals in production and preservation. The second is maximizing coordination, right, among our public, private, and philanthropic partners. That means how do we start to align our applications, our messaging, and our language? How about a one-stop technology system for our development sector? And also creating space for our public, private, and philanthropic partners to coordinate solutions at scale with their funding. And that's what Sarah was referring to earlier on the Funders Collective. And the third is enabling the environment, right? So through best practices, policy zoning, borrower capacity building, and then also creative capital. How do we enable the environment to move production and preservation forward? So, Bill, you asked me about an org chart. I said, well, this is a sticky question. You know, a chart for the field could include that we're all working under one integrated and resilient housing plan, one that actually sustains and evolves through administrative changes so that we could measure meaningful progress over years. And the 5 organizational support systems under that org chart could look like: 1, programming, which would include housing planning, production, and preservation. It would also be a space for innovation. The second would be policy, state and local actions in order to support the system. Capital, traditional, and innovative solutions using debt, equity, and subsidy. Capacity, right? We heard that through a number of folks. Without capacity, we can't move goals under a housing plan. So thinking about long-term cultivation and capitalizing of developers, owners, and property managers to support the housing plan, which acts as that umbrella. And then lastly is measurement and accountability, right? So how do we start to create a transparent process of measuring our progress, but also celebrating our wins such as we are today?
Thank you, Megan. Next up, I want to ask Margie Stagmeyer, who's a partner in TriStar Real Estate Development. Margie's actually developed, I think, what is a new model that's getting both traction here and in the state and around the country, really to join housing and how it can positively affect educational outcomes. How could housing in a neighborhood be a positive influence on schools? Margie Stagmeyer.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you for having me here today. Okay, so what we like to do, we're a baby model. We are just getting started. And what we like to do is we buy blighted and low-performing housing, mainly larger apartment communities around low-performing schools or high-need schools. And what we found is by wrapping the housing around the school, we've actually had a lot of real positive impact on the school. So we like to call ourselves an education model with a housing solution. We just purchased our first deal in the city of Atlanta, a blighted apartment community off of Cleveland Avenue, and our school is Cleveland Elementary. And we did that in June, and we're already having a lot of real positive traction with the school. We have a lot of children that are affected by mold because they've lived in mold at this property. So we've partnered with Morehouse Medical. So basically what we're doing in our model is we're designing an ecosystem where actually education is the central focus. And it gives us a true metric to measure how our apartment community is doing by keeping the rents affordable for working poor families. I think my question was how do we sustain this and how do we replicate it? Well, actually, we're having a lot of conversations with landlords around Atlanta and actually around the country. Last week alone, we had landlords representing about 14,000 square feet come talk to us, and we're looking at ways to engage them through education. So I do think that there's an opportunity to replicate what we're doing, or at least educate other landlords and public schools on how basically they can use this model in their own community.
Thank you, Margie. Terry just referenced that it took a whole team to get this done at the city and in the community. I want to invite Brandon Reddick Seals, the CEO of the Housing Authority. Brandon, the question is, Housing Authority is a very well-run portfolio of housing, a far cry from decades earlier. We really have a new model. And this high-quality housing has been instrumental in spurring the revitalization of numerous neighborhoods in the city. However, in recent years, the development of new Atlanta Housing Authority units has slowed considerably. How do you intend to ramp up the development to meet the increasing need? This is a low-ball question for you. Thanks for being
Bill,
here and your
I appreciate
leadership.
Good morning. How's everyone? I'll step up here. Thank you so much. Congratulations on 30 years. And first, I'd say I can't do it without my team at Atlanta Housing. I see a number of members, our Choice Grant leader, Tracy, who's over our customer service group, who really leads our housing choice voucher, and my COO, I saw Paul Vraniker, and our VP of Government and External Affairs. The how is continuing on much of what I've heard, from Terry and her leadership that she's taken, and us collaborating and working together. I've really had 3 goals and 3 goal areas that I've focused on since taking this seat, since May 9th. Revitalize agency, revitalize communities, and revitalize relationships. The last one is so important to me because it's important for us to learn how to fight for each other instead of with each other. and that we get back to a focus on moving ahead. Revitalizing agency is that we can get in a posture so we can actually execute. Affordable housing-driven mixed-use development in communities that do have connectivity to transit, education, figuring out a lot of public infrastructure issues is what we're solving for every day. We take the vouchers that we have, we subsidize tenants, and we subsidize projects with our HomeFlex and our project-based voucher program. But two things that we also are doing right now is we changed our site and vicinity, which is a housing choice voucher process, but which we look at a lot of scattered sites so that those projects can actually receive a subsidy. Formerly, you had to have a 5 property inspection on 4 sides of a single family detached home. We lowered that to 3 sides and 1 property. 84% of our properties can actually pass now that failed previously, and that's north of about 122 single family homes and a number of blighted properties around the city. The other, which is pretty exciting to us, and we've been working collaboratively with the city and working with Terry, is a lot of our former sites that a lot of people are curious about. When you think about Bankhead, you think about Bowen, Inglewood, North Avenue, Palmer, as well as Herndon, which is a very important one to us. We are actively reprogramming and planning, getting back to the table, deconstructing a number of these deals and reconstructing them to figure out where did some things go wrong. It's been a little over 6 months since I stepped in the seat, but I can truly say that our team is focused. We're partnering, we're talking again, and we're moving forward with a number of our partners, much like we have at the Civic Center. Andrew, we're excited about that vote last week with our board, and I'm looking forward to figuring out more collaborative ways to not only do the work, but also win the trust and restore some relationships. So, Bill, hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about that more.
Look forward to working with you. You know, that's a leader that will, I was going to ask you about all that property. A leader will tell you the answer before you ask the question. So thank you, and thank you for your leadership. We've got the last question coming up, and then our mayor's going to be here to speak to us. Let me say that this was a different housing forum in that I had to follow a script, not something I'm used to doing. And I went off script a few times, so we're about 10, 12 minutes over what we usually contract with you. I hope he won't walk out on the mayor or me as we get toward the end, because we'll just be about 10 minutes late as we finish up. Let me now turn to Ann Carpenter from the Federal Reserve Bank. And I always like to say Ann's my data person. When I don't know something, I call Ann, and I think all of us do in town. So I got a very specific question for you, Ann. We know the feds are, yeah, you're interested in money. I mean, that's the way we think about the Federal Reserve and we think about money. But we know that the Fed also conducts research on the nation's affordable housing. What is the Fed's primary focus in the affordable housing field? And what is yours? And what can we do as a community to get the Fed more engaged in our work? And can we expect to see a more engagement in the future? Can we expect to see more of this Raphael Bostic that we've heard about? Would we expect to see more of him in the community and understand his interest in affordable housing? And finally, you know, our goal is $1 billion. If you got an extra billion over there, we could make the announcement today. Ann, thank you for being here.
Bill can't resist. Okay, well, thank you, Bill, and thank you to the leaders. Oh, let me.
Hello, everyone. I'm Raphael Bostic. So I figured, you know, I'd heard all this stuff about how the forum calls out people, so I'm feeling right at home. So thank you very much, Bill. I just wanted to say, you know, affordable housing is something that is so important for communities, and Bill talked about this as a moral issue. For me, this is an economic issue. When people are unable to be housed in a sustainable way, they do worse in labor markets, they do worse in terms of schooling, they do worse in all the things that are going to allow us to be more productive. So this is really an important thing for us as the Federal Reserve, and you know, I'm here because I want to make sure that you guys know that this is something that's very important to our institution. Now I'll hand this over to the data person.
Thank you, Raphael. Yeah, and thanks to the leaders and the teachers and the voices of the community who are here today. So we are more than just a data shop, but that is kind of a primary role that we play. We have access to great data. We're a very neutral, apolitical institution. So whenever we can play that role, either on the policy side or thinking about low and moderate income communities in particular in 6 states in the Southeast, so we're learning about what's going right, what they're struggling with, and we can take some of those lessons back to Atlanta. So we have the research side. We do quite a lot of outreach too. We've been involved in House ATL, which was a phenomenal experience, and some other actually metro-wide affordable housing initiatives. You know, the Federal Reserve touches affordable housing in a lot of other ways. So I work in community development, where again we focus on low and moderate income communities. I focus on affordable housing, but we have our bank supervisors who are looking at fair lending and CRA. And then, you know, monetary policy, we touch on, of course, affordability issues there with interest rates. So, you know, there's a number of different ways. I would love for all of you all to reach out to me if there's something that is impacting your communities that you need better data on, or you need policy solutions on. You know, we can help to facilitate that or bring other resources to bear. Please sign up for our Twitter or check out our website to get our publications. But I am an open book. You can email me, ask me out for coffee, whatever you prefer. So I'd love to hear from everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. I guess you weren't ready to make the announcement about the billion, but we'll wait for the next meeting. Very important, and that you're a regular participant. President Bostic, thank you for being here. When you first came to town and we sat down to talk, you said, I'll be there anytime I'm in town, and you've been good to your word, so thank you for that. Okay, we're going to transition. Maybe something we've all been waiting for. I need to change my mic. Is this working? As many of you remember, and many of you were in the room, about a year ago, the Housing Forum took the opportunity to convene one of the many, many mayoral forums. And many of those forums were focused on a particular issue. It might be water or housing or neighborhoods or any number of things that the candidates had to answer to. We had all 10 candidates here, and we spent 2.5 hours focused on affordable housing. And I have to say, it's tough if you're running for mayor. You have about 40 of these things going on around town, trying to be an expert in anything. But one of the very important to all of us in this room commitments that we got from one of those candidates, who's now the mayor of our city, was a commitment that affordable housing would be at the top of the list, that we would have $1 billion public and private housing. ATL's come up with a plan, but if the mayor doesn't say it, if she does her remarks, I'll say it to you, she's going to need our help and our participation to make that commitment come true. It is my honor to invite to the podium our mayor, Keisha Lance Bottoms. You want to keep that? Oh, no, we're going to.
I feel so tall now. Thank you. Wow. Well, good morning. Bill, are you sure it was just 10 of us? I mean, it felt like there were at least 30 of us the last time I was here. But it sure is good to be a winner. So I'm glad to be here, glad to see all of you all today. I do remember that forum very well because it was very early in the morning. It was at 7 o'clock in the morning. And at some point during the campaign, you are making a lot of commitments. And what I found during the campaign is just tell the truth. And then it won't be that difficult to remember. As my mother always says, you only have to tell the truth once. And the truth that I spoke of during the campaign was our commitment to affordable housing. And so I'm so grateful that almost 1 year in, I can stand in this beautiful church and continue to speak the truth as to what our commitments are as a city. With the leadership of our Deputy COO, John Keene, also Megan Sparks. We have a Megan Middleton. Megan Sparks from our Equity Office, and I know that Terry Lee is here somewhere as well. Thank you, Terry. We have really been able to focus in earnest on affordable housing in our city. I recently had the great pleasure of finally finishing the biography of Mayor Maynard Jackson. What struck me in reading his biography was the discussion and focus on affordable housing, even in 1974, on how we get it right in the city of Atlanta. But what I'm most grateful about is that so many of you in this room really have been doing the hard work for decades. What I do know is this, and I did speak of this a great deal during the campaign, the difference maker in my life and my ability to stand here as the 60th mayor of Atlanta had so much to do with the education that I received in Atlanta public schools. And what struck me as a student at Douglas High School, which at that time was the largest school in the Atlanta public school system, is we didn't have racial diversity, but we had social economic diversity. And what I now know as a parent of 4 is that when we are talking about improving education outcomes in our city, it has so much to do to making sure that there are a mixture of people and students represented within our school system. At Douglas High School at that time, Bolling Homes was still in existence. So you had children from upper middle class homes in Collier Heights to children who came out of what was then our housing projects in the city, all given the opportunity to have a quality education. So I know that as we continue to talk about our efforts on affordable housing, it really is a comprehensive conversation. And that's what I'm most proud of that has happened during this year. For the first time in recent memory in our city, we've had stakeholders literally in a room at the table having a comprehensive conversation on how we maximize resources and improve outcomes, not just to make sure that people can afford to live in the city of Atlanta, but that there's also access to quality education and the needed services throughout the city as we bring people into our city. I started off this morning with a meeting with Governor-elect Brian Kemp. And what I shared with him is that I've had a number of surprises this year, but almost none bigger than the time that I spent across the street at the state capitol talking about our priorities, one being affordable housing. I expected that conversation to be a very heavy lift because primarily I was making new friends, many of them white Republican men from rural areas throughout the state. But what was most surprising to me, and I was very happy for this interaction, is that they too were talking about affordable housing. Now for many of them, it's because they come into the city of Atlanta and they love the Beltline, by the way, but they are very much aware of escalating prices, housing costs in our city because they are experiencing it. But also what Governor-elect Kemp shared is the recognition that it's an economic piece as well, that it's a workforce piece as well. When you have businesses in the city, when you have people who are attempting to get to jobs in the city and they can't afford to live in the city, it's a strain on our economy. So I share this story with you to say that the conversations are being heard. We know that it's about improving our communities and fulfilling the reason that we should all be elected to serve to make our city better. But we also know that there are other people paying attention, and for whatever the reason and whatever the focus, it's important that we maximize the opportunity. So I am thankful. I heard Raphael Bostic, I think, announce $1 billion towards affordable housing. Is that right? Is that right? But I am grateful in ways big and small that the focus continues and will continue. My grandmother used to always have a saying that all things work for the good of those who love the Lord. And what I've realized in this year, there have been a lot of things that we have not been able to control and sometimes not been able to focus in the way that we would hope to focus on our agenda. But even with all that's gone on in the city this year, I believe internally it has made us give even more focus to the things that we know are a priority. Housing, affordable housing remains a priority within the city. And so I'm grateful and want to, again, thank each of you for the work that you are doing. Thank you to House ATL and to all of you all gathered today because you've made the lift a little easier for us within the city of Atlanta. We look forward to the continued conversations. We look forward to continuing the progress and to making sure that Atlanta remains a place for us all. Thank you.
It takes real courage when you're running to take on the hardest issue in the city. And that's what Mayor Bottoms did. Didn't necessarily come out of just because we had a housing forum here. It was because it was one of the most important issues and challenges in the city. So I'll go back to Terry Lee's statement and mine that I just made. We all are on the team. This mayor needs our support. She also needs our accountability, and you can count on us for that. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. And before I step down from my perch, I ask that you please turn your attention to the screen for a special video presentation. Thank you, Bill.
Congratulations, Bill Bolling. For 30 years at the helm of the Atlanta Housing Forum, you are always the optimist, always willing to herd the cats and listen to all our voices and be the compassionate advocate. You kept us at the table, assured that we didn't get lost in the weeds and the minor details, and kept our eye on the big picture. You made us search for solutions for our city and told us it was going to be hard work.
Bill, thank you for all you've done to make the Atlanta Housing Forum the success it's been, and all you've done in many, many other ways to make Atlanta a better region. Thank you.
Congratulations to the Atlanta Housing Forum for 30 years of networking knowledge and action. Because of your work, thousands of units of affordable housing have been created all across Atlanta. Congratulations also to Bill Bolling for being at the helm. We salute you.
Bill Bolling and the many that have worked on the Housing Forum for the past 30 years, thank you for a job well done.
Congratulations, Bill, on your 30 years of leadership as the head of the Housing Forum. Keep up the good work, and we look forward to many more years of service.
So, of course, in celebrating the 30 years of the Housing Forum, we really need to give a shout out to Bill Bolling, who I don't believe has missed a forum, or if he's missed a forum, then I have too.
Congratulations, Bill, for your 30 years at the helm of the Housing Forum.
Bill, congratulations to you on your 30 years of effort. It's actually making progress. And under the current situation, we look forward to another 30 years. Thank you.
And Bill, I want to say congratulations to you for your leadership of the Regional Housing Forum. It wouldn't be the same without you.
Hi, Bill. Congratulations on 30 years of moving the regional housing conversation forward. ARC is proud to have supported your work these past 15 years and to be a partner with you and your colleagues there in creating a safe space for people to talk about some often difficult but important issues for the region. And because of your work, we feel we now have a jump on addressing this critically important issue. That is to say, we think we can avoid getting to the crisis point that a lot of our neighboring metropolitan areas are experiencing around the nation. Over the next few years, with your continued help and leadership, all of us here are going to be working collaboratively to make our regional housing strategy a reality. We're going to be engaged in things like House ATL, the Regional Housing Task Force, ARC's Catalyst Initiative, just to name a few of those. Not to mention, with all of that, we're going to continue to meet right here, the place where our regional housing conversation started. Congratulations for 30 great years again, Bill, and here's to 30 more.
Thank you so much. Yeah. No.
Congratulations, Bill Bolling, for 30 years at the helm of the...
Bill, this is not on the program.
Yeah, I realize
it's not. On behalf of your community, Bill, this was passed down through all these hands touched it. We want to present you with this little token of all our appreciation. For 30 years, you showed up. You started it. And as Frank reminded us in the beginning, it was monthly. I don't even know how many of those there were, but there were plenty. And you called your community together, and we're going to get it done. So here you go, Bill.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you. Let me just kind of finish things up. I know we're late. Always got to have the last word. Maybe we're not doing it every month because we're older by 30 years. I don't know, or just got smart. But let me just echo both what the mayor said. We can create the city for all and the city that we want to live in. Let me echo Tamanika, that it really takes a village. It takes a community. So it's not the Bill Bolling show. It is the Housing Forum, all of us who get this done. The power of place. And of course, we've moved this forum around. But the power of place, a place that we can come back to and be civil, hold each other accountable, share ideas, is a powerful idea. The power of people, of you in this room and all the folks that you represent, is a powerful idea that gets things done. The power of ideas, which is what we do at the Housing Forum, is we share ideas with each other and learn from each other. I think the power of accountability, that we've got to hold each other accountable, is really at the bottom line of what we've got to do. In a time where we have less civility, where we're kind of living in our tribes, where we're fearing each other in a way that we've never done that before. In a time where the values are changing and we're not on board. The values of community, of accountability, of being there for each other has never been more important. So I may not be with you in 30 years, but I'll commit to another 30 years that we'll continue this conversation. I want to thank a number of people who made this happen just very quickly. Again, St. Luke's, the folks here, David and Brian and the rest of the team, it all worked today, to my amazement. So thank you at St. Luke's. There's a steering committee, which many of you are on, who help us, not only do today, but really to figure out the agenda from each meeting. Those folks in the room that are on the steering committee who meet outside of our meeting. Could you stand up just a second? Thank you. Say that I just followed the script today. Somebody had to develop the script, come up with the idea, be down here at 6 o'clock in the morning, see if everything's going to work. So the person that I want to personally thank is George Bergen. George. This is the man right here. Thank you. I'll see you all in March. Have a good day. Thank you.